The December air in Chicago didn't just bite, it owned the streets. But inside the brownstone on Orchard Street, the world was filtered through the scent of dried eucalyptus, expensive bourbon, and the steady rhythmic hum of a life built together. Elias stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the snow blur the streetlights into soft golden halos. He was 28, a man of quiet movements and steady hands, wearing a charcoal sweater that Clara had bought him because of matching the hint of salt and pepper starting to reclaim his temples. He heard her before he saw her. The soft thud-thud of wool socks on hardwood, then the familiar weight of her forehead pressing against his shoulder blade. "The guest list is down to 0, Clara murmured, her breath warm through his sweater. "I told your mother the flu was going around the neighborhood. I told my sister we were exhausted. I lied to everyone I loved just to be alone with you." Elias turned in her arms. Clara looked tired in the way that only the end of a long year can make a person look, but her eyes, dark and intelligent, were fixed on him with a heat that hadn't dimmed since their honeymoon in Ravello. "Best lie you've ever told," he whispered, pulling her into the crook of his arm.
And now, the slow countdown.
They spent the early evening in a state of domestic grace. There was no grand party, no forced laughter over champagne towers. Instead, they cooked. They moved around the kitchen like a choreographed dance. He chopped the shallots, she deglazed the pan. There is a specific kind of eroticism in long-term marriage. It isn't the frantic, uncertain energy of a first date. It is the heavy, grounded pulse of knowing exactly how the other person moves. It was the way Elias's hand lingered on the small of her back as he reached for a wineglass. It was the way Clara caught his gaze and held it a second too long while she tasted the sauce from a wooden spoon. "You have a bit of—" Elias started, leaning in. He didn't use a napkin. He used his thumb to wipe a stray drop of cream from the corner of her lip, his gaze dropping to her mouth. Clara felt that familiar stir, the low, coiled tension in her stomach. "It's not even 9 o'clock, Eli." "I'm a patient man," he said, though his voice had dropped an octave. "But the year is ending. I don't want to leave any words unsaid or any inch of you untouched before the clock strikes." The atmosphere shifts. By 11, the house was dark, save for the amber glow of the fireplace and the twinkling white lights of the tree they hadn't yet taken down. The jazz record on the turntable had reached the end of its side, the needle clicking softly in the groove. Clara sat on the oversized velvet sofa, a glass of vintage Bollinger resting on the coffee table. She had changed. Gone was the oversized sweater, replaced by a silk slip dress the color of midnight. It was a garment that felt like water against her skin. Elias walked back into the room carrying 2 glasses. He stopped. The firelight caught the curve of her collarbone and the way the silk clung to her hips. The air in the room suddenly felt thick, charged with the static of unspoken intent. "You're staring," she said, her voice a playful challenge. "I'm worshipping," he corrected. He set the glasses down and walked toward her. He didn't sit next to her. He knelt between her knees, his large hands resting on her thighs. The contrast of his warm, rough palms against the cool silk made her breath hitch. He looked up at her, his expression stripping away the years, leaving only the raw hunger of the man who had asked her to marry him on a rainy pier a decade ago. "I want to thank you for this year," he whispered, his hands sliding upward, gathering the silk. "For the hard days and the quiet ones."
And now, the midnight hour.
He leaned forward, kissing the sensitive skin just below her ear. Clara wound her fingers into his hair, pulling him closer. The kiss that followed wasn't tentative. It was deep, tasting of wine and history. As his mouth moved to the hollow of her throat, Clara's eyes drifted to the grandfather clock in the hall. 11:45. "The bedroom?" she whispered. "No," Elias murmured against her skin. "Right here, in front of the fire. I want to see you." He stood, pulling her up with him. The slip dress slid to the floor with a soft hiss, leaving her bare in the firelight. Elias stripped off his shirt, his chest heaving slightly. When he took her in his arms, the heat was instantaneous. He lifted her easily, her legs wrapping around his waist, and brought her to the thick rug before the hearth. The world outside, The snow, the neighbors, the ticking New York City ball didn't exist. There was only the friction of skin, the sharp intake of breath, and the steady beat of two hearts synchronized by 1,000 shared nights. Every touch was a language they both spoke fluently. He knew the exact pressure she liked. She knew the way his breath hitched when she arched her back. It was an exploration of a map they had memorized, but still found new paths across. As the intensity peaked, the muffled sound of fireworks began to echo from the city harbor. The distant boom-boom vibrated through the floorboards, punctuating the rhythm of their bodies. 7, 6. He knows exactly how to touch me, his fingers circling and pressing in all the right places. The sensation is intense. I can feel the sensitivity building, the waves of pleasure crashing over me as he continues to tease and tantalize. My body trembles, my breath coming in short gasps as I, 5, 4, as I, biting my finger, as I, 3, 2, we ride the waves of our pleasure. And he continues to push in me. I can feel his arousal, the way his body responds to mine. He kisses me deeply, his tongue exploring my mouth as he reaches his own moment of release. Elias buried his face in the crook of her neck, his voice a low growl of her name. Clara gripped his shoulders, her eyes wide, watching the shadows of the flames dance across the ceiling as the world turned over into a new year.
Welcome to a new year, January 1st.
The fire had died down to glowing embers. They lay tangled in a mess of discarded clothes and a cashmere throw that Elias had pulled from the back of the chair. The silence was profound. The digital clock on the oven in the distance read 12:15 a.m. Clara rested her head on his chest, listening to his heart rate slowly return to its resting pace. Elias reached out, tracing the line of her jaw with his forefinger. "Happy New Year, Clara," he said softly. She tilted her head up, kissing the underside of his chin. "Is it strange that I feel like we just started?" "Not strange at all," he smiled, pulling the blanket higher around them. "We have the whole year ahead of us. But I think I'd like to stay right here for the first few hours of it." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in a fresh white silence. Inside, the air was warm, smelling of cedar and love as they drifted toward sleep in the first quiet moments.
The first anniversary of a marriage often feels like a victory lap. But for Elias and Clara, it felt like a deepening of the roots. As December 31st approached, a quiet, competitive tension hummed between them. They had spent the year learning the geography of their shared life, and now they both wanted to mark the milestone with something that proved they truly saw each other. Elias, 4 p.m. He is out and about thinking about tonight and can't wait.
Elias stood in a dusty, sun-drenched studio in the West Loop, looking at a small, heavy object on a velvet cloth. He had spent months searching for this. As an architect, he valued form and history, but as Clara's husband, he valued the things that helped her breathe. It was an antique brass-cased pocket watch from the late 1800s, but it had been modified. Where the clock face should have been, a master engraver had etched a perfect miniature map of the stars as they appeared over Chicago on the night they met. "Is it possible to add the coordinates?" Elias asked the jeweler. "Already done, Mr. Thorne," the man replied, pointing to the inner rim, "the exact latitude and longitude of that balcony on Wacker Drive." Elias ran his thumb over the metal. Clara lived her life by the hospital's clock, seconds, minutes, shifts. He wanted her to have a piece of time that didn't belong to the hospital, but to them. It was heavy, permanent, and perfectly hers. He tucked the box into his coat pocket, feeling a surge of boyish nerves he hadn't felt in years.
Clara, 5:30 p.m. Has been out for a few hours now.
Clara emerged from a tiny basement-level bookstore in Lincoln Park, clutching a package wrapped in brown paper and string like it was a holy relic. Elias was a man of logic and steel, but she knew his secret heart was built on the stories he'd read as a lonely boy. For months, she had been hunting for a signed first edition of An American Architecture by Frank Lloyd Wright, a book about the architecture that had inspired him to pick up a drafting pen in the first place. She had found it, and it's signed by the author, with an original architectural sketch tucked into the flyleaf. I want him to know that I support the foundation he's built, she thought, her heels clicking on the icy sidewalk, and that I'm the one who gets to live inside his dreams. She hid the book in the trunk of her car, her heart racing. She felt like a conspirator in the best kind of heist.
The Convergence, 11:30 p.m., E Orchard Street, Brownstone.
The house was a sanctuary of low light and the scent of pine. They had shared a quiet dinner, the conversation easy and punctuated by long, meaningful silences. As the clock neared midnight, the air in the living room shifted from domestic comfort to a sharp, electric pull. Elias stood by the fireplace watching Clara as she poured 2 fingers of bourbon. She looked radiant in a cream silk robe, her hair piled loosely on her head. "You've been acting strange all day," she said, handing him his glass. "I could say the same about you," Elias countered, pulling her into his space. He set the glasses on the mantel, his hand sliding down her back to pull her hips flush against his. "But I think we can table the discussion for a few minutes." Clara wound her arms around his neck, her eyes dark and searching. "I think the new year deserves a proper welcome, don't you?" The lead up to midnight wasn't a countdown. It was a slow, deliberate undoing. In the heat of their bedroom, the year of firsts. First mortgage, first holiday, first arguments. It all fell away. There was only the familiar, exquisite friction of their bodies. Elias moved with a slow, worshipful intensity, his mouth tracing the scars and curves he had come to know as well as his own blueprints. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. As we move together, he teases me with his fingers, making me gasp with anticipation. His touch sends waves of pleasure through me. I rub against him, feeling his body against my sensitive skin, driving me wild with desire. His hands roam over my body, his fingers slipping down below to tease and tantalize. Clara met him with an equal fire, her nails marking his shoulders as she pulled him deeper into her. They both look at each other. They both feel the release at the same time. Everything was tight down there. We didn't want to move, I just wanted to feel him. As he was holding me, he slowly relaxed. "Clara," he whispered, "I love you." She grabbed him so tight he thought she was going to break him. She whispered, "I love you too."
12:30 a.m., The Afterglow.
Wrapped in a shared duvet on the rug by the bedroom fireplace, the world felt small and perfect. "Wait here," Elias whispered. He disappeared for a moment and returned with the small velvet box. At the same time, Clara reached under the bed and pulled out the heavy brown paper package. They looked at each other and laughed, 2 children caught in the same secret. "You first," Elias insisted. Clara opened the box. When she saw the brass watch and the star map of their first night, her eyes welled with tears. She ran her finger over the coordinates of the balcony. "Eli, how did you even find this?" "I wanted you to have a way to find your way back to me," he said softly, "no matter how long the shift is." Clara swallowed hard and handed him her gift. Elias unwrapped the book, his breath catching as he saw the signature and the sketch. He touched the aged paper with a reverence that made Clara's heart ache with love. "This is the start of everything for me," he whispered, looking from the book to her. "The work, the city, and then you." He pulled her into his arms, the antique watch clicking softly between them and the old book resting on his lap. "To the first year," Clara whispered against his chest. "To the next 50, Elias replied, kissing her forehead as the first snow of the anniversary year began to fall outside their window.
It was New Year's Eve, 3 years after they had moved. The lake house was Elias's magnum opus, a sleek, cantilevered marvel that seemed to float over the frozen water of Lake Michigan. The retrospective, 11 p.m.
The house was dark, save for the fire and the subtle floor-level lighting that guided the way to the hearth. Elias sat on the low velvet hearth bench, the rare edition of architecture by Frank Lloyd Wright, resting on his knees. Clara sat between his legs, leaning back against his chest. She was dressed in a silk slip that caught the orange glow of the embers, her skin smelling of the expensive wood smoke and the vetiver perfume Elias had bought her in Paris. Let's see where we were, Elias whispered, reaching into the back of the book. He pulled out the thin stack of papers. They were a timeline of their devotion. Clara opened the one from 3 years ago, the year they decided that their life together was whole, exactly as it was. She read her own handwriting. I want to build a life where we never stop being each other's primary adventure. No diversions, no distractions. Just the constant discovery of who you are becoming. Elias tightened his arms around her. I remember that. We went to Iceland 2 weeks later, just us and the Northern Lights. He opened his letter from the same year. My goal is to never let the silence of this house feel empty, to fill it with the kind of intimacy that most people only find in the first month of knowing someone.
Both are waiting, and it is so close too. The midnight hour, 11:40 p.m.
They didn't watch the ball drop on a screen. They watched the clock on the mantel, the heavy brass one Elias had designed to match the watch he'd given her years ago. As the minute hand crept toward the 12, the air between them grew thick. There was a specific kind of freedom in their marriage. Without the responsibilities of parenthood, they had remained the center of each other's gravity. Their love was still greedy, still focused, still hungry. Elias stood, pulling Clara up with him. He led her to the massive glass wall that looked out over the ice. The moon was a sliver of white, reflecting off the frozen lake. I want to start the year seeing everything, Elias murmured. He reached for the tie of her silk robe. It fell away, leaving her bare against the backdrop of the winter wilderness. He didn't rush. He traced the curve of her hip, his touch slow and deliberate, a silent inventory of his favorite place in the world. When he turned her around to face the glass, the cold of the window was a shock against her front, but the heat of his body against her back was an immediate, searing counterpoint. Eli, she breathed, her palms pressing against the glass, his body pressing against mine, his hands roaming over my hips. I can feel his arousal pressing into me, and him pushing against me. His breath hot on my ear as he whispers a few sexy words, telling me how much he wants me. His chest is against my back. I feel his weight. I feel the sweat between us. My forehead is just touching the glass as we look out over the lake. I arch my back, and I feel him leaning back as he goes back and forth. I reach for the edge of the curtain. I grab the cloth in each hand. I am he is really holding my hips. I push onto him. There is a slap noise that is created by us with each thrust. His hands, his touch is more insistent, more demanding. When he groans, I groan. We both look over at the clock. Clara, we are going to make it. Stay with me and listen to my voice. Clara, breathe. She whispers into a moan. I don't know if I can. Clara, listen to me. Breathe. Her moaning got louder. She could feel the tightness. We are both starting to shake. Clara, look at the horizon, he whispered in her ear, his hands moving with a possessive, rhythmic grace. We are almost there. 5, 4, 3, 2. Right at midnight, after dozens of powerful thrusts, he finished with a series of smaller, pulsating contractions, each one sending a final ripple of ecstasy through my body. His release was intense and overwhelming, filling me completely. He had to catch me. My legs went weak. He carried me over to the bed, got me a glass of water, kissed my forehead. Love you.
A new year brings new promise. The Midnight Pulse, 11:45 p.m.
For Elias and Clara. Elias, tonight, can we just watch the ball drop? I want you to hold me like you never held me. I love you with all my heart. Clara, sweetie, for sure, are you okay? Yes, but we need to wait for the new year. Clara, I love you, that is not a problem. So they both stared out the window overlooking the lake. For Clara, it was a beautiful, tearful goodbye to the Just Us era. As she held him, her eyes squeezed shut, she felt the incredible weight of the moment, the bridge between the life she wants to build and the life she hoped he would be okay to create. Every touch felt heightened, every breath felt like a prayer. Clara, sweetie, we are almost there. 5, 4. She could feel her eyes getting wet for this one question she wanted to ask. 3, 2. The ball dropped, signaling the arrival of the new year. They were locked in a fierce, breathless embrace. The world didn't just move, it just reset. They gave each other a kiss and said Happy New Year. The smiles were ear to ear.
The revelation 12:05 a.m. She hopes and prays.
The room was lit only by a few thick pillar candles. Elias was propped up against the headboard, the sheet draped low across his waist, watching Clara as she stood by her travel bag. "I have something for you," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling slightly. "I know we said no gifts this trip because the villa was the present, but I couldn't wait." She walked over and handed him a small white box tied with a simple silk ribbon. Elias smiled, taking it from her. "Clara, you can't help yourself, can you?" "Just open it, Eli." He untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of tissue paper, tucked beneath them was a small piece of stationery written in her elegant, "I want us to have a child." For a long, heart-stopping moment, he didn't move. The man who designed skyscrapers and understood the physics of the world was suddenly rendered speechless by a piece of paper. He looked up at her, his eyes wide and searching. "Clara?" "A baby," he choked out, his voice muffled against her. "Ours. A piece of you and a piece of me." He pulled back to look at her. "Everything I've ever built. It's nothing compared to this. It's absolutely nothing." "Clara?" "Yes." He kissed her then, not with the hunger of the night's earlier passion, but with a reverence that felt holy. He held her as if she were made of the most precious glass in the world, his heart thudding against hers. Outside, the lake tide continued to pull at the shore, but inside the foundation had shifted. The book was still on the nightstand, waiting for its next entry, but the story had already become a masterpiece.
The lake house, usually their sanctuary of glass and light, felt like a fortress under siege by the wind. But inside, the atmosphere was thick with a different kind of storm. The quiet, just-us life they had cherished for so long had been transformed into a vigil of heavy breaths and gripped hands. 8 p.m. The long wait.
Clara leaned against the kitchen island, her knuckles white as she breathed through a contraction. She was 9 months and 4 days pregnant, her belly a beautiful, low-slung weight that seemed to have its own gravity. I thought we had at least until the 3rd, she gasped, her eyes squeezed shut. Elias was a blur of calm, controlled motion. He had the bags in the car, the heater running, and his hand was constantly on the small of her back. The Thorne heirs have always had a flair for the dramatic, apparently. "The doctor is waiting, Clara. Let's go." The drive to the hospital was a blur of white-out conditions and Elias's steady hands on the wheel. He drove like he was transporting the most fragile blueprint in existence, his jaw set against the howling wind. 10:30 p.m. The ICU veteran becomes the patient. By 10:30, they were settled in a labor and delivery suite. The room was dim, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump-thump of the fetal monitor filling the silence, the most beautiful music Elias had ever heard. Clara, the woman who had spent years calmly managing crises in the ICU, was now in the center of her own. She was exhausted. The labor had been grueling, a slow burn that had started in the early afternoon. I'm not going to make it to midnight, Eli," she whispered, her hair damp with sweat clinging to her forehead. Elias was sitting on the edge of the bed, his shirt sleeves rolled up, letting her crush his hand with every contraction. He didn't flinch. "You've survived 12-hour shifts on your feet and saved lives with less sleep than this. You are the strongest structure I know. Just look at me." She focused on his eyes, the same eyes that had watched her on a balcony in a brownstone and across a lake. He was her anchor, the steady point in a world that was currently tilting on its axis. 11:45 p.m., the final push. The energy in the room shifted. The nurses moved with a new urgency and the doctor took her position. Outside, the city of Chicago was gearing up for its celebration, but inside these 4 walls, the only clock that mattered was the one measuring the seconds between Clara's breaths. "Almost there, Clara," the doctor said. The new year is 10 minutes away. Do you think you can give me a New Year's baby? Clara let out a ragged, defiant laugh between pushes. I just want him out. Elias was right at her ear, his voice a low, steadying hum. You're doing it. He's right here, Clara. I can see him. Almost there. 5, 4, 3, 2. As the clock on the wall ticked over to midnight, a muffled cheer erupted from the nurse's station down the hall. In the distance, the faint, low boom of fireworks from the pier vibrated through the hospital windows. But Elias and Clara didn't hear it. The world had narrowed down to this bed, this effort, and the sheer force of Clara's will. She gave one final agonizing push, her eyes locked onto Elias's, her soul bared in a way that surpassed any intimacy they had ever shared. At exactly 10 minutes past midnight, the silence of the room was shattered by a sharp, thin cry. It was the loudest, most wonderful sound Elias had ever heard. He's here, the doctor whispered, lifting a tiny, squirming, red-faced boy. 12:10 a.m., January 1st. They laid the baby on Clara's chest. The transition was instant. The pain that had dominated the last 12 hours vanished, replaced by a stunned, shimmering peace. Clara's arms instinctively curled around the small, warm weight, her tears falling onto the baby's hospital cap. Elias leaned over them, his arms encompassing both of his worlds. He was crying openly now, his forehead resting against Clara's. He's perfect, Elias choked out. Clara, look at him. The baby, Leo, let out a tiny, soft huff and settled against his mother's skin. He was the new foundation. He was the letter they didn't have to write because he was living, breathing proof of everything they had promised each other. As they both look at each other, their eyes are fading. They knew what the other one was thinking. How can two people meet years before and be here tonight? It's been a long day as they start to fall asleep, both dreaming of that night.
Just years before the brownstone on Orchard Street, Elias and Clara were two strangers moving through the same city, both feeling the strange, hollow weight of a New Year's Eve they didn't particularly want to celebrate. Elias, 7 p.m. The bachelor apartment. Elias stood in front of a fogged-up bathroom mirror, wiping a circle clean to check his tie. He is a rising architect at a firm that demanded 60 hours a week, and he was profoundly bored with his own life. His apartment was modern, which was a polite way of saying it felt unlived in. There were no photos on the walls, only blueprints and a single dying succulent on the windowsill. His phone buzzed on the granite counter. It was a text from Marcus, his oldest friend. Don't you dare flake, open bar, high-end crowd. My wife's cousin is coming and she's a hand model or something. Just get here. Elias sighed, adjusting his cufflinks. He didn't want a hand model. He didn't want an open bar where he'd have to shout over synth pop to be heard. He wanted a book and a glass of scotch, but the silence of his apartment had begun to feel like a physical weight. He felt like a structure with a solid foundation, but no interior warmth. He grabbed his wool overcoat and stepped out into the biting wind. As he hailed a cab, he looked at his watch. 5 hours until the year ended. He made a deal with himself. 3 drinks, stay until midnight, and then slip out. He had no idea that he was walking toward the last first date of his life. Clara, 8:30 p.m. Across town, the scene was much louder. Clara was sitting on a vanity stool while her roommate, Sarah, aggressively applied glitter to her own eyelids. You're wearing the green silk, Sarah commanded, pointing a makeup brush at the dress hanging on the closet door. It makes you look like a literal forest goddess, and you've spent too much of this year wearing a lab coat. Clara laughed, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She was 27, finishing her residency, and her brain felt like it had been put through a paper shredder. She spent her days in the sterile, high-stakes environment of the ICU. The idea of a New Year's Eve party felt frivolous, almost alien. I'm exhausted, Sar, Clara admitted, pulling the emerald dress off the hanger. I just want to order Thai food and watch the ball drop in my pajamas. Nope. New Year, new Clara, Sarah insisted. You've spent 12 months saving lives. Tonight, you're just a girl in a beautiful dress who might get a midnight kiss from someone who doesn't smell like antiseptic. Clara stepped into the dress. The silk was cold against her skin, cinching at her waist and flowing down to her knees. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked sophisticated, radiant, and utterly lonely. She felt like she was waiting for something to happen, a shift in the atmosphere, a reason to stop looking at the exit signs in every room she entered. "Fine," Clara said, grabbing her clutch. "But if a guy with a man bun tries to explain cryptocurrency to me, I'm leaving by 11.
The party, 10:45 p.m., the penthouse on Wacker Drive. The party was a blur of gold tinsel, expensive perfume, and the low thrum of deep house music.
Elias had been there for nearly 2 hours. He was on his second drink, leaning against a marble pillar, watching the crowd with a detached, analytical eye. Marcus had tried to introduce him to the hand model, but Elias had politely excused himself after 5 minutes of talk about organic cuticle oils. He was just about to find his coat when the elevator doors at the end of the foyer opened. Clara stepped out, shivering slightly as she handed her coat to the attendant. She was adjusting the strap of her green dress, looking around the room with a localized expression of, "Where is the nearest exit?" Their eyes didn't meet immediately. Elias watched her move toward the bar. She didn't walk like the other women in the room. There was no performance in her step. She moved with purpose, even if that purpose was just getting a glass of water. He found himself straightening his posture. Clara reached the bar, but it was 3 people deep. She sighed, a small, visible breath of frustration. She turned her head, scanning the room for Sarah, and that's when she saw him. He was standing by the pillar, a drink in one hand, watching her with an intensity that wasn't predatory, it was recognizing. It was the look of someone who had been lost in the same woods and had finally found another person with a map. Elias didn't wait. He set his drink down on a passing tray and walked toward her. The noise of the party seemed to dampen, the bass of the music becoming a secondary heartbeat. He stopped 2 feet away from her. Up close, he could see the slight fatigue in her eyes and the way the emerald green of her dress made her skin glow in the candlelight. "I was just about to leave," he said. "No, hello, no, do you come here often?" Just the truth. Clara looked up at him, her heart doing a strange, fluttering somersault she hadn't felt since she was a teenager. "So was I." "Then we're both failing at being social." Elias smiled, and for the first time in months, the expression felt genuine. "I'm Elias." "Clara," she replied, her voice steadying. Clara, he repeated, testing the weight of it. "Would you like to go stand on the balcony? It's freezing, but it's quiet, and I think we both need a minute of silence before the world starts screaming, 'Happy New Year.'" Clara looked at his hand, held out tentatively toward her. She didn't know him. She didn't know that in years to come, they'd both be in the hospital giving birth to their first baby boy. She only knew that the air between them felt like a lightning strike about to happen. "Lead the way," she said, slipping her hand into his. As they stepped out onto the balcony, the first snowflake of the night fell, disappearing against the heat of their joined palms. The countdown hadn't started yet, but for both of them, the year was already over, and something much better was beginning. Elias stepped into the wind first, then turned to shield Clara with his body. He didn't let go of her hand. "Better?" he asked, his voice low, barely carrying over the muffled thumping of the bass through the glass doors. "Much," Clara exhaled. She leaned against the railing, the cold air hitting her heated skin like a physical relief. "I think if I had to hear one more person talk about their personal brand, I would have climbed over this railing myself." Elias laughed, a rich, grounded sound that made Clara look at him properly. In the moonlight, his features were all sharp angles and shadows. "I'm an architect. My entire life is built on branding. But tonight I just wanted to be somewhere where the walls didn't feel like they were closing in." He stepped closer, closing the gap until the heat radiating from his overcoat seeped into her silk dress. "What do you do, Clara, when you're not escaping parties?" "I'm an ICU resident," she said. Elias paused, his expression shifting from polite interest to a deep, quiet respect. So you deal with the real things. Life, death, the stuff that actually matters. Sometimes it feels like the only things that matter, she admitted, looking out at the city lights. Coming to a place like this, it feels like a movie set. It doesn't feel real. We're real, Elias said. The simplicity of the statement made her turn back to him. He was looking at her with a terrifying level of focus. He wasn't looking at her dress or her hair. He was looking at her as if he were trying to memorize the architecture of her soul. I don't even know you, she whispered, though she reached out and curled her fingers into the lapel of his coat. You know me better than anyone in that room does, he replied. Inside, the crowd began the chant. The sound was distorted by the glass, a rhythmic primal roar that signaled the end of the old world. 10, 9, 8. Elias reached up, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His skin was warm, a startling contrast to the winter air. 7, 6, 5. Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic, joyful bird. She realized she wasn't cold anymore. The adrenaline was a fire in her veins. She tilted her face up, her breath mingling with his in a white cloud. 4, 3, 2. I'm not going to wait for the ball to drop, Elias murmured, his face inches from hers. He didn't wait for one. He leaned in and captured her mouth just as the city erupted. Fireworks hissed into the sky from the Navy Pier, blooming in concussive bursts of red, gold, and violet, reflecting off the windows of the penthouse behind them. The kiss was everything the party wasn't. It was honest, it was hungry, and it was desperate. Elias wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her slightly off her heels to bring her flush against him. Clara's hands flew to his neck, her fingers disappearing into the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him down as if she were drowning and he was the only air left in the world. It wasn't a nice kiss. It was a claim. It tasted of the champagne they'd shared and the cold, clean winter wind. It was the feeling of a long-delayed homecoming. When they finally broke apart, the sky was filled with drifting smoke and the distant sound of horns and cheering. They were both breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. Happy New Year, he whispered into the space between them. Clara smiled, a wide, radiant thing that transformed her face. I think I like this new Clara thing after all. Elias tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his hand lingering on her cheek. I'm not letting you go back into that party alone. In fact, I'm not sure I'm letting you go at all. Good, she said, her voice small but certain, because I have no intention of leaving. They stood there for a long time, two strangers who had become an us in the span of a few heartbeats, watching the first snow of the new year begin to coat the city in white, unaware that years later they would be celebrating the same moment in a hospital. Leo was fast asleep in the plastic bassinet next to the bed. Elias sat in the chair beside Clara, holding her hand, kissing her hand. Happy New Year, Clara. Happy New Year, Papa, she whispered back.
For those who are watching, some of the names were changed to protect of the not-so-innocent. Thank you for watching and listening. There is more stories to come. If you like this content, please subscribe and a thumbs up. Please leave a comment of where you are from.